Welcome to the Daily DLP. I'm your host, Ash Thompson, and today I'll be looking at the San Francisco 49ers offense. Let's get it on! All year you've been hearing me talk about Shanahan offenses. Here's a branch off of which a lot of those shoot. Kyle Shanahan built his offense on the back of his fathers. Mike Shanahan pioneered the specific blend of West Coast short passing and outside zone running that has come to be known as the Shanahan offense with the Broncos in the 1990s. Now, that's not to say it hasn't grown in scope and complexity since then. That Broncos team had an offensive line coach who genuinely believed you only needed one running play because the players on the field would turn it into whatever it needed to be on every down. And if you have the right blend of linemen and running backs, that's actually not far from correct. If there's a guy in your area, block him. If there's not a guy, climb to the second level and block somebody there. Or if there's a guy who needs to be doubled, do that. The running back gets the ball 5 to 7 yards off the line and starts moving towards the sideline and kind of picks the hole that opens up depending on what the blocking does. Like the running back doesn't need to run 4-3. They just need to be able to get from 5 yards deep to the line of scrimmage through the hole in an instant and kind of see how blocks are going to develop as opposed to waiting for them to develop and reacting. Terrell Davis was the best example of this. Dalvin Cook was another one in Minnesota who did a really good job with these. The Lions run a fair amount of zone-based concepts, so you've seen this every week. Like when Jahmyr Gibbs seems to be just kind of flowing to whatever hole opens in front of him, that's one of these runs. When the linemen are pulling or trapping to kick open a specific hole for them to go through, that is not a zone run. That's something else. I'll do a whole series about this stuff in the off-season. Because it's kind of neat, actually. Some teams have started like pulling guys to zones to disguise their run call, and it's like a really nice, cool wrinkle that I would get very excited when I see. The 49ers still base their run game around that play, the outside zone. But it's not really all they bring to the table, and they do it a little bit differently. One of the big evolutions between like the Mike Shanahan and Kyle Shanahan offenses was to put the back closer to the line than that 5 to 7 yard depth so that when the hole developed, they could get to it quicker. Fantasy football players know the result of this change. Literally anyone who started a game for the Kyle Shanahan offense in San Francisco at running back was instantly the hottest running back in the league. An offensive line that opens holes and a running back that sees those holes before they open, and you have a hugely successful day rushing the ball, or even an entire season, like guys like Raheem Mostert, or Matt Breida, or Tevin Coleman, or Jeff Wilson, or JaMychal Hasty have all been fantasy superstars for the San Francisco 49ers. Like the Shanahan offense is the reason that there is this pervasive myth in draft theory that you can just pick up a running back on day 3 and they're going to be awesome. And you're going to say right now, like, okay, well, what about Isaiah Pacheco? Not cool. What about every other day 3 running back that was drafted in that draft year? It's like saying you don't need to draft a pass rusher high because Max Crosby hit for the Raiders, or because Romeo Okwara had a 10-sack season. Like, cool. What about all the pass rushers who didn't? Just a personal pet peeve. And like, am I doing the same thing where I'm, cherry picking? Okay, well, what about Trey Hendrickson? What about Danielle Hunter? What about Justin Matabuke? What about Jonathan Grenard? What about Danico Autry? What about Zach Seller? What about Bryce Huff? Those are the guys drafted in the 3rd round or later who got 10 sacks this year. So tell me why there's no you can wait on pass rushers narrative. It's a league-wide thing, but I digress. Back to the 49ers. Kyle Shanahan agrees with me on this, that you need running back talent despite having found success with all of those nobodies. After years of making do with lesser players and lining wide receivers up at running back even when he needed a big play, he went out and got the guy in the league who was the best fit for his offense, and that was former top 10 pick Christian McCaffrey. And they paid a whole bunch of draft picks to do it. But the end result for this week, what we're focusing on, is that the 49ers have the most dangerous weapon on either team in their backfield. McCaffrey led the NFL in rushing yards this season and was second among running backs in rushing TDs with 14. A couple quarterbacks beat him. You know who they are. His 5.4 yards per attempt were also tops among running backs with a significant number of carries. Remember a couple guys who had like 3 carries and beat that number, but they don't matter. And if that were not bad enough for us this week, he can also line up as a wide receiver, and occasionally does. He added 564 yards receiving and another 7 touchdowns to all of that rushing production. He had over 2,000 yards from scrimmage this year. Basically, when McCaffrey gets the ball, there is a much higher than average chance that something good will happen. He had a 54% success rate rushing, and his receiving success rate was 55.4. Both of those, for a running back, are ridiculous. And that's all reflected in his AV from Pro Football Reference. That's the stat that basically just measures the results when this player is around the ball. 18 is a ludicrous number. An average starter gets about 7 in that stat. But here's the good news. When McCaffrey was held under 55 yards rushing this season, the Niners went 1-3. That's key one. You cannot let Christian McCaffrey just rack up yardage. He's not the only dangerous thing on the offense, but stopping him that's basically the table stakes for competing with the San Francisco 49ers offense. And there's 2 ways to stop a zone rushing scheme. The first is you design your defense to break down that wall of blockers in their zones and make a tackle before the running back gets rolling towards the line of scrimmage in whatever hole develops. That's what single gap schemes try to do. The other is to hold the offensive line up, basically just kind of bounce along towards the sideline with them. That's what 2 gap teams try to do against zone blocking. It's going to be interesting to see which of those Aaron Glenn deploys this weekend. Both of them can be effective, but they also both have kind of their downsides. Like if nobody breaks through the line, that's a problem if you're running a single gap scheme. But if someone does break through the line and don't make the tackle, that's a giant hole for the running back and a big play for the offense. But basically, if somebody gets pushed back when you're trying to build that wall, again, that's a massive hole. Like everybody has to stay in that line. If it starts kind of going forward and backward, that's a gap that opens up. And the running back goes through there, and it's a huge play. And that's one of the reasons that so many teams use this rushing scheme, is because it's easy for players to learn. And the defense is kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't, unless they go very well. Like if everyone wins in a 2-gap scheme, the running back basically either just hits a hole that doesn't exist for no gain or ends up running out of bounds. But if even one guy on the offense wins their rep, it's a big gain. Unfortunately. Like the Lions mix both of those concepts in their defense, kind of depending on the team that they're facing, whether it's like a true finesse line or a power line. The Niners kind of have both. It's why this offense is really, really good. In pass coverage, there's not really many linebackers that can handle McCaffrey, and we don't have any, to be blunt. It's a special person at the linebacker position who handles this guy. And like we have some good linebackers. We have a bunch of guys I like. We have Jack Campbell, who I really like. We have Alex Anzalone, who I really like. And, who iced the game last week, Derek Barnes. But if you put any of them in a situation where Christian McCaffrey has a 2-way go, they are corpses. Like they are dead on that rep. That's a coaching fail if that ever happens even a single time. But the Lions do have guys that match up with this, and that kind of brings me to the next guy, because it's a similar thing, and the same 2 guys that'll be matching up against these guys whenever the Lions can arrange it. George Kittle isn't someone your linebackers can deal with either. But the Lions have C.J. Gardner-Johnson for one, and they have Brian Branch for the other. And whichever play that is, like the Lions, do run a defense where they have 4 safeties on the field with those 2 guys, Kirby Joseph on the back end and Ifeatu Melifonwu basically playing linebacker. I want to see that defense on any passing downs that happen as often as possible. But Kittle, like he's basically the grown-up version of Sam Laporta. He wasn't as good to begin with, but he's kind of, he might not be the best tight end in the NFL, but he's in the top 2 or 3. In his 7-year career, he's been first-team All-Pro twice, second-team twice, made 5 Pro Bowls. The only 2 years he didn't make the Pro Bowl were his rookie season as a 5th-round draft pick and the year where he only played 8 games because of an injury. He's the proverbial throwback tight end, not just a big slot receiver. Like I said, he does all the things Laporta does. He does the blocking. He does the, he might have 12 catches in this game. And if he does, that's probably a very good thing for their offense. He's also a huge part of why the 49ers run game is successful. And because of that, he is just deadly in play action situations. And that's the key involving Kittle here is like I talk about manning up Branch and Gardner Johnson, but the reality is most of the time the Lions are going to be in a zone defense. That is just the way the defense works. And that means the guys dealing with Kittle, likely linebackers. The more of the run-stopping load the line can take on without the linebackers earlier in the game, the less effective play action should be later in the game, specifically to Kittle. Now, if Anzalone is living in the San Francisco backfield early and getting tackles for loss, that's not a bad thing, obviously. But if you see linebackers at the beginning of the game making tackles, 5 to 7 yard gains, like early on, and then that stops in the second quarter, that is setting up big play action gains to Kittle to follow. That sequence of events is basically kind of the nightmare scenario of the Lions not being able to stop the run without scheming their linebackers to kind of lean toward run stopping as opposed to pass coverage, because that creates a gap between them and the safeties on the back end, which is a great spot for tight ends and slot receivers to take advantage of. And once that's happened, it's just on the QB to figure out what the defense is doing with linebackers pre-snap and make sure the team is in a play that exploits that. So, early stops in the run game from the defensive line, that's what we're hoping to see. First quarter tackles, 5+ yards, linebackers, or worse, safeties, and things have not started well and are likely to go poorly for most of the day. That assumes that Brock Purdy gets them into the right place. And he gets kind of the same sort of grief that Jared Goff gets. Like, it's the system. He's got a great situation. It's not really him being great. And, like, personally, I think the 49ers would have won the Super Bowl last year if it hadn't been for Purdy's elbow falling apart in the NFC Championship game. He makes good reads. He gets the team into good plays when he has to, and he finds the open guy and gets that guy the ball. And some people will say, every quarterback should be able to do that, but they can't. Gardner Minshew can't. Marcus Mariota can't. Justin Fields can't. Mac Jones can't. Zach Wilson can't. Aiden O'Connell can't. Kenny Pickett can't. Mason Rudolph can't. Will Levis can't. Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito, Tyrod Taylor can't. Sam Howell can't. Bryce Young can't. And that's just the guys who have, like, no ability to do this basically at all at this point. And, like, some of them or earlier in their careers, and they may develop the ability to do that in the future. But Purdy's also in his second year, and he can. Like, he threw for 9.6 yards per attempt this season. If there was a system that created that number consistently, every NFL team would be running it. Like, that's the highest of any full season starter has put up in the last decade, and I just didn't go check back farther than that, other than a couple specific examples, like Tom Brady's 50 touchdown season, where they were just dropping nukes on the entire league. His yards per pass was 8.3. His career high was 8.6. He never got to 9. Peyton Manning's zenith in the year where he was basically the king of football and threw 49 touchdown passes, like, he only threw for his career high of 9.2 yards per attempt. He didn't do what Brock Purdy did this year. Like, no system gets you those results. No group of players other than the quarterback get you to that level of success. Like we saw with Jimmy Garoppolo, what this system gets you. It gets you 8. And that's really good. Like if you're not dragging it down, 8 is kind of your baseline on this. And that's what it got with Brock Purdy as a rookie, as like just the perfect example of a guy who was not elevating the system in this system, still gets 8 yards per reception. It is a great system. And you can like look at last week and say, well, yeah, but he played terribly in the playoffs. Come on, it was a weather game. Like the ball was wet. The rain was gross. That's not going to be there for the Lions this week, sadly. The teams that did coax like legitimate bad games out of Purdy this year, because every quarterback does have 4 or 5 of those every year, were Baltimore, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Minnesota. And yeah, I'm calling his 365 yards and more interceptions than touchdowns a bad performance against Cincinnati. Like if he has that day against the Lions, we're going to win. But what those defenses do is they pressure the quarterback. And then on the days where he had a bad day, they caught the ball when he made bad decisions. Like it does happen. You really have to take advantage. Like if you don't hit him and you don't catch the ball when he gives it to you, this offense is going to put up a lot of points. And there's not a lot of offenses that can keep up. We have one. But their defense is also very good. And it's built to play with a lead. So you can't let them get up early. Like, say, the Baltimore game as an example of the worst case scenario. Offense is going into their second or third drive, down 21 points already. That can't happen this week because there's no coming back from that against this team. That's really it. That's the recap. Stop Christian McCaffrey. Like, that's simple. Hopefully without having to just absolutely annihilate the line of scrimmage with linebackers. Cover George Kittle. And like, we don't know if Deebo Samuel's going to play still at this point. If he does, he's probably going to be injured and not as effective as he normally is. But like, how good do you got to be to put up numbers against our outside corners as the number 1 receiver for a team? And even if he doesn't play, Brandon Ayuk is still very good. If you're at San Francisco for the game, get some dim sum for me. Everywhere you go there that sells it will be delicious. Trust me. And scream your face off. See you after the game.